Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm John Coatsworth, the Acting Dean of the School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia. Welcome to the Gabriel Silver Memorial Lecture. This lecture series, created by Leo Silver in honor of his father Gabriel, supports lectures by leading public figures on topics related to international relations and peace. Previous lectures have included Dwight Eisenhower, Rajiv Gandhi, Madeleine Albright, and Willy Brandt, among many others. Columbia University President Lee Bollinger will now introduce our distinguished speaker for this evening.
Thank you, John. I'd like to recognize John Coatsworth as a wonderful interim dean of CIPA, and also Albert Bresson, the head of the Center for Energy, Marine Transportation, and Public Policy. Gerhard Schröder is our guest this evening. In 1963, he joined the Social Democratic Party of Germany, and in 1966, he began his law studies. Passed state examination, went into training for legal work at the Regional Court of Hanover, passed the second state examination and was admitted to the practice of law, and then practiced legal work at the Regional Court of Hanover. From 1980 to 1986, he was the member of the German Bundestag. In 1990, he was elected Minister-President of the state of Lower Saxony. In October of 1998, he was sworn in as the 7th Chancellor of the Federal Republic of Germany, which he served in that office until 2005. Currently, he has assumed the role of Chairman of the Shareholders Committee of the North European Gas Pipeline Company, Nord Stream AG, after leaving office in 2005. This has been followed closely by media and created some discussion. He is also a member of the European Advisory Council of the Rothschild Investment Bank. I think that the several things to note about the significant time of Chancellor Schröder in this period from 98 to 2005, and I think one of the most significant is his leading of the opposition to within his country and within Europe to the US-led invasion of Iraq. His government was also sharply defined by the policies of the Greens, and under his leadership pushed through a phase out of nuclear power in Germany. And lastly, it's highly notable that under his leadership, civil unions were legally recognized, allowing gay and lesbian couples who registered their partnerships many of the advantages enjoyed by heterosexuals. It's a great pleasure to welcome Chancellor Schröder to Columbia. Chancellor?
Thank you. Mr. President, Mr. Dean, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your friendly invitation. You have asked me to make a few observations on the relationship between Europe and Russia and its impact on global and European energy supply. Russia, by no means, is an important partner, not only for Europe, but also for the United States of America. Without Russia, we will not be able to master any of the major international challenges facing us today. This applies to the difficult situation in the Near and Middle East as much as it does to finding a solution to the Kosovo conflict. In addition, we need Russia's support when it comes to questions such as disarmament, the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons, and combating climate change. The global situation has changed dramatically since the early 1990s, when the Soviet Union fell apart. The bipolar international system has Russia has also changed. Russia is no longer the weak negotiating partner we experienced in the 1990s. In those days, Russia was a country whose statehood was falling apart. There was a real danger that Russia, a nuclear power, could have become ungovernable. It's been the great accomplishment of the incumbent Russian president that he has led Russia back to a path of stability in the years since 1999. Today, Russia is a self-confident country, internally stable and economically strengthened due to its wealth of natural resources. While some people may have problems with self-confident Russian politics, one thing cannot be denied. The international community of nations stands to gain from Russia as a stable and reliable partner on the eastern border of the European Union. If we succeed in integrating Russia into international politics through cooperation, we'll be able to cope with the major challenges we face today. However, this means that both sides, Russia as well as Europe and the United States, must be willing to compromise. The relationship between Germany and Russia is particularly important in this context. Germany and Russia share a painful history. About 27 million people lost their lives in the former Soviet Union during World War II, a war that also caused suffering and left many people dead in Germany. That's why we know in Germany just how important a good relationship between Europe and Russia is for peace and stability. For this reason, my predecessors and I have always cultivated a particularly close relationship with the rulers of Russia. After Germany's reunification, we considerably strengthened our economic contacts with Russia. We are convinced that trade goes hand in hand with the modernization and liberalization of Russia's society. Our close cooperation in the energy sector goes back to the 1970s, when we first started importing natural gas. In the past few years, we have broadened this cooperation by adding other sectors, especially manufacturing and high-tech products. But Russia is also very important for Europe from a geopolitical perspective. At the beginning of the 21st century, we are witnessing the political and economic rise of Asia, especially of India and China. The key question for us in Europe is, what role will our continent play in future? Europe is going through an integration process. In the past few years, the European Union has grown from 15 to 27 member states. Economically, the internal market has made considerable progress, and it's very successful. Politically, however, we still have some homework to do. This applies in particular to the lack of a common foreign and security policy. In this century, we're seeing the Asian continent develop into a second pole in geopolitics along with the United States. Our goal in Europe must be to develop our continent into a third pole, not only economically, but also politically. However, we will only succeed if Europe continues its internal integration and its external enlargement. This applies, for example, in particular to building a bridge to the Arab world through the accession of Turkey. On the other hand, I'm convinced that Europe will not develop its full global leverage unless it benefits from Russia's resources and capabilities by establishing a joint strategic partnership. Russia has a wide range of interests and traditions that extend from Europe to Asia. First and foremost, however, Russia sees itself as a European country. This is an opportunity for us because Russia does have another option. It could also turn to the so-called Eurasian region. These developments must be seen in connection with the increase in Asia's political power and the economic development, especially in China and India. We experience the emergence of bilateral military structures in Central Asia and multilateral structures in the Eurasian region, such as the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. China, Russia, and 4 Central Asian republics are members of this organization, and they closely cooperate with India, Pakistan, and Iran. We are witnessing the formation of a common area of political, economic, and most importantly, energy cooperation. This need not be negative, because stability in this region will also benefit peace and development on a global scale. But in Europe, we must ensure that Russia does not exclusively concentrate its attention on this region, because the emergence of a new political structure dominated by Russia and China is certainly not in our interest. For this reason, we must tie Russia to Europe as closely as possible, and this also in the interest of the United States. My impression is that US foreign policy is too focused on keeping its distance from Russia. This may be due to a mindset that is still influenced by the time when the 2 blocs were serious enemies. But I think it's a mistake that certain members of the US administration tend to pursue a so-called policy of containment towards Russia. This also applies to the planned installation of a US missile defense system in Eastern Europe. The current US-Russian talks on this subject should be intensified, and Europe's objections to the project should be taken into consideration. Ladies and gentlemen, Russia also plays a key role when it comes to how we can secure an energy supply in a global context. This is one of the major global challenges, firstly in terms of access to natural resources, and secondly in terms of the ecological impact of energy production. In the next 20 years, the demand for fossil fuel will increase dramatically, mainly due to the energy needs of India and China. The key question will be how to ensure international energy security and energy supply in a fair, unrestricted, and affordable manner. This is a challenge that not only affects energy policy, but also, and more importantly, affects the world economy as a whole. According to the latest study published by the International Energy Agency, global energy consumption will have increased by far more than 50% by the year 2030, compared to today's level. As a result, carbon emissions will be 20% higher than today. This clearly demonstrates that the international community of nations, and in particular the industrialized nations, must actively combat climate change. Without countermeasures, global climate conditions will change so dramatically that they may get totally out of control. The first manifestations are already visible today. Floods, desertification, and extreme weather situation have caused great suffering for millions of people worldwide. To make things worse, access to the most vital resource, water, will become increasingly difficult for billions of people. Already today, 1.3 billion people do not have access to clean drinking water. We must not allow water to become a commodity for which people will have to fight with military means. Thus, climate change is a political threat, but it's also an economic challenge, because the cost of repairing the damage will be enormous. Internationally, we will need to come to an understanding on a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and a slowdown of climate change. The UN Climate Summit in Bali will play an important role in this context. What is required is a follow-up agreement to Kyoto Protocol. The industrialized nations, so far accountable for the largest share of greenhouse gas emissions, have to shoulder particular responsibility. But we must also ask the newly industrialized countries, in particular China and India, to set targets so that their industrial catching-up process will not turn into an uncontrollable risk. Ladies and gentlemen, how can we respond to these challenges? First of all, we need to pursue a sustainable energy policy that will make careful use of available resources and make us less dependent on fossil fuels. This will only be possible if we really on greater energy efficiency and the use of renewable energy sources worldwide. In the past few years, we in Germany have performed a turnaround in our energy policy. Germany is a leading country worldwide, both in the fields of energy productivity and the use of renewables. Renewables currently account for more than 10% of total electricity consumption, and in the next 15 years, this share is expected to double once again. If this trend continues, about half of our electricity may be generated from renewables in 2030. Ladies and gentlemen, some people believe that nuclear power could provide an alternative. While I was in government in Germany, we decided to phase out nuclear power. I think this was the right thing to do, because all this technology does is create new problems. It is susceptible to malfunctions and poses a considerable security risk in times of international terrorism. And this does not only apply in one's own country, because nuclear power situations simply cannot be protected against terrorist attacks. More importantly, the global use of nuclear power plants creates an infrastructure that can be used as a basis for building nuclear weapons. The conflict has already become manifest in North Korea and Iran, as well as between India and Pakistan. And in the Near and Middle East, there are other countries such as Jordan, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt that strive to pursue their own nuclear programs. Just imagine the threat that might develop in these parts of the world if irresponsible regimes came into power and used the infrastructure for non-peaceful purposes. It must therefore be in our interest to contain the global use of nuclear power and, in particular, to put uranium enrichment on an international footing. This could also help to solve the conflict with Iran's nuclear program. Nuclear power poses yet another great risk, the question of the ultimate disposal of nuclear waste, which is still unresolved. This is an enormous problem for which we have not yet found a viable solution, and it's a burden that we are imposing on future generations. That is why I consider a greater use of nuclear power the wrong approach. Instead, we should rely on renewables and greater energy efficiency. Ladies and gentlemen, secondly, we should continue to diversify the supply of fossil fuels. The burden of responsibility and the risks associated with energy supply should be shared. Only then we will be able to ensure the kind of stability in energy supply that we need to enjoy a positive global economic development. This means that industrialized nations should make use of as many energy sources, as many transportation routes, and as many suppliers as possible. For the purpose, substantial funds will have to be invested in exploration grids. The International Energy Agency has estimated the cost at $22 trillion. It is increasingly difficult to develop new energy fields, either because they are located in regions that are politically and socially unstable, such as many African countries, or because the energy fields are found in regions such as Siberia, where the natural environment makes it extremely difficult to develop them. As far as the transportation routes are concerned, we will have to build new pipelines for oil and gas. For Europe, this means that we'll have to build new gas pipelines, both from Russia, such as Nord Stream, Baltic Sea Pipeline, and from the Near and Middle East, Central Asia, and Northern Africa. Another alternative may be to transport more gas by means of LNG tankers. Thirdly, I'm convinced that we need a multilateral approach to energy policy. To this end, it will be necessary to further institutionalize the international energy relations. The key instrument will be the Energy Charter, which protects and promotes investments, trade and transit. However, the most important countries, especially Norway, the United States and Russia, have not signed or ratified the treaty. I think that the Energy Charter is a suitable instrument to make the energy market more reliable. For this reason, there should be negotiations on the provisions of the Energy Charter to make it more attractive for other countries. And fourthly, we need stability in the region of Near and Middle East. More than 60% of the energy reserves are located in this region. In the event of a conflict with Iran, the Strait of Hormuz would be blocked. The Annapolis Conference was an important first step on the way towards full peace in the region. However, we need to intensify our diplomatic initiatives. In this context, direct talks between the United States and Iran, as well as with Syria and also with Hamas, are very important. Without such direct dialogue, it will not be possible to solve the problems in Iraq or the conflict concerning the Iranian nuclear program or the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians. My advice, therefore, is to continue the direct talks and to once again ensure that both the European Union and Russia will be closely involved. Ladies and gentlemen, whether we will be able to achieve a secure and peaceful energy supply around the globe will depend on how we manage the following four challenges: a sustainable energy policy, fair access to energy, a multilateral energy policy, and peace in the Middle East. Russia will be an important partner in these efforts, not only for us in Europe, but also for the United States, because without Russia, we will not be able to master these challenges. I'm therefore convinced that it would also be helpful for the United States to adopt a new strategic position in its policy towards Russia. A partnership with Russia is necessary to enable us to solve international conflicts more effectively. Europe, and in particular Germany, attaches great importance to finding multilateral solutions to international conflicts. Cooperation and dialogue are the two key strategies when it comes to the containment and solution of conflicts. Against this background, I think that a good relationship between Europe and Russia is crucial, and I am therefore a supporter, not only in Germany, but also in Europe, of a closer partnership between the European Union and Russia. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I will be pleased to answer your question. Thank you very much for your attention.
There are microphones on both aisles for those of you who would like to pose a question to the Chancellor. Here first.
My name is John Blymeyer. Chancellor, you discussed with approval the prospect of Turkey joining the European Union. And I wonder if there is ever any discussion of a long-term possibility of Russia's accession to the European Union. It seems to me historically, culturally, and economically, Russia is indeed more compatible with the European Union than Turkey, and certainly no less compatible than, let's say, Bulgaria or Romania. And a European Union which would include Russia would, of course, be the most powerful political entity on the planet and would reinstate a bipolarism with its implicit balance of power. So I'd be interested in your reaction to that question. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please accept that I answer in German, because my English is not good enough to have a discussion with you. Mrs. Hassinger-Lies will translate, and it's better for you and better for me. Die Frage, ob Russland nicht eher ein Partner oder ein Mitglied der Europäischen Union sein könnte als die Türkei, könnte man damit abtun, dass eine Mitgliedschaft Russlands die Europäische Union vollständig verändern würde, zu einer Dominanz Russlands über die Europäische Union führen würde, der sich sicher ganz viele Mitgliedsländer der Europäischen Union nicht anschließen könnten.
Well, you're raising the question, sir, whether Russia might not be an even more appropriate accession partner to the EU than Turkey. That is the example you're referring to. A very interesting thought indeed. But I think this is a question that one could only decide thinking into the future, really. And certainly one would have to say that the balance within the European Union would change completely and dramatically. This new member would potentially dominate the European Union altogether by means of its sheer weight and size. And I think lots of people might not be happy with the idea. Lots of existing members might therefore not be happy with the idea of such a dominant player becoming involved. But still, it's an interesting view.
Ich stimme Ihnen aber ausdrücklich zu, dass kulturell, historisch Russland, auch seine jetzige Führung, sich als ein europäisches Land begreift. Trotzdem braucht es einfach wegen der Größe des Landes, auch wegen der Situation in der Ökonomie jetzt, eine zwar enge Partnerschaft zwischen der Europäischen Union und Russland, aber gegenwärtig an eine Mitgliedschaft Russlands in der Europäischen Union zu denken, hielte ich für falsch.
But still, I would very much agree with you that certainly when we look at fields such as culture or history, Russia and also its present Russian government would fit very well into the context of the European Union. Certainly the present Russian government see themselves as a European country as such, but if you look at the enormous size, if you look at the economic situation of Russia today, then certainly I would say what they need is very close cooperation with Europe, but not really membership. At this point in time, I would say membership for Russia would be the wrong way to go.
Der schieren Größe wegen würde die Europäische Union mit einer Mitgliedschaft Russlands gegenwärtig und in absehbarer Zeit doch überfordert werden.
I think even with just the sheer size of Russia as a member to the Union, I think the European Union would be completely overburdened and couldn't cope.
Es ist etwas anderes mit der Türkei. Ich glaube, dass die Mitgliedschaft der Türkei in der Europäischen Union von enormer sicherheitspolitischer Bedeutung für Europa selbst ist. Es liegt also in unserem eigenen Interesse, die Türkei zu einer Mitgliedschaft zu bringen.
The matter of Turkey is an entirely different one here. I very much am of the opinion that Turkish membership in the European Union would bring a tremendous security policy benefit to the whole of the European Union, not just the Union, but also beyond. And therefore, I think we would be very well advised to gain that additional benefit if we could.
Diesem Forum muss man nicht die schwierige sicherheitspolitische Lage in der Region erklären, in der die Türkei ein Anker für Stabilität ist.
I think this is a forum where I need not delve into the detail as to why Turkey becoming a member of the European Union would be such an advantage in terms of security policy. An audience like this one does know.
Gelänge es der Europäischen Union, die Türkei zur Mitgliedschaft zu bringen, würde das bedeuten, dass es möglich wäre, zu beweisen, dass ein nicht fundamentalistisches islamisches Land und die Grundsätze der europäischen Aufklärung keine Gegensätze sind, sondern miteinander vereinbart werden können. Gelänge ein solches Experiment, wäre das ein großes Beispiel, denke ich, für die gesamte Region und ein enormer Sicherheitszuwachs für beide Seiten.
I go even further. If the European Union were to succeed to make Turkey a member of the European Union, then I think we would have a unique chance. We could go in and we would be blessed with the possibility to prove that it is indeed possible that a non-fundamentalist Islamic country could go hand in hand with European enlightenment, and that those two would not stand to one another as a contrast, but they could far rather complement one another. I think it would set a great example for the whole of the region around Turkey too, and it would be a tremendous increase in security for Europe.
Question here.
Thank you. Mr. Chancellor, with your permission, I would like to ask you two very brief questions. You referred very tangentially to the placing of missile defense units by the Bush administration, the proposal, in the Czech Republic and Poland. Sir, what is the opinion of the German public, and if I may ask of the European public, to this scheme? My second question relates to the Nord Stream underwater Baltic Sea natural gas pipeline, of which, sir, you are the chairman. What are the prospects of this pipeline coming on schedule in view of the very strong opposition from the Baltic countries and from Sweden in particular about its environmental impact?
Die erste Frage, die vorgeschlagene Missile Defense System. Was denkt denn die deutsche Öffentlichkeit darüber?
Also wir haben keine letzten Untersuchungen über die Frage, wie die deutsche Öffentlichkeit über das Raketensystem in Tschechien und in Polen denkt. Die Frage ist ja auch, was verstehen Sie unter Öffentlichkeit? Wenn ich schätzen sollte, dann würde ich sagen, dass die Deutschen insgesamt bei einer Befragung gegen ein solches System wären, weil sie zu Recht ein neues Wettrüsten befürchten und weil sie natürlich nicht davon überzeugt sein können, dass unter den gegenwärtigen Umständen dieses System wirklich eine Bedrohung aus dem Iran abwehren soll. Es ist wohl eher Teil einer, wie ich persönlich finde, falschen Politik auch gegenüber Russland.
Madam, I begin with your question number one. Obviously, unfortunately, I have no empirical study at hand to give evidence as to what the wider German public thinks of the missile defense system to come up in the Czech Republic and Poland predominantly. But also, I mean, one would have to think very clearly about what you mean by the German public as such. I mean, it obviously is a case of definition. Having said all that, if you went in and just asked your average German about what they think about the proposed system, then I think people would more or less, well, certainly a big majority would be against it, because people would, and I think possibly to a degree with justification, fear that there could be a new arms race as a consequence of such a system being set up. And I also think that a lot of Germans would not be convinced that the system as it is projected now is truly there to fight off an attack potentially coming from Iran. We would far rather feel that it is a system that is meant to show a power symbol to Russia, which we would also consider to be politically a wrong turn.
Vielleicht darf ich erklären, was das Fühlen der Deutschen angeht, so wie ich es wahrnehme. Es hat in der deutschen Geschichte Zeiten gegeben, wo die Deutschen, eine etwas sehr offensive Beziehung zu militärischen Maßnahmen hatten. Und das hat sich nach dem Zweiten Weltkrieg Gott sei Dank geändert. Ein politischer Führer, der in Deutschland erreichen will, dass man an einer militärischen Intervention teilnimmt, der braucht sehr, sehr gute Gründe, um das der Mehrheit der Deutschen erklären zu können. Ich persönlich halte das für einen ungeheuren geschichtlichen Fortschritt in Deutschland.
But let me say one more word about that German gut feeling. I took the freedom to side here by saying that Germans, in their gut feeling, would, I think, in a majority be against it. This is certainly how I see it. I think there were times in German history, and we shall now not delve into that, where Germans had a very close relationship to military activities and military means. Fortunately, I would like to say, after the Second World War, all of that close affiliation is gone altogether. And I think these days, if you happen to be in a leading position, politically speaking, in Germany, and if you want to speak the word towards a military intervention in whatever given country, then you need very, very, very good reasons to convince the German audience or the German public of the necessity of those. I actually think that this change in attitude is a great political progress.
Was die Pipeline durch die Ostsee, also die Baltic Sea angeht, zunächst einmal, warum gibt es sie überhaupt?
Well, as to the pipeline issue that you're referring to with question number 2, now let's start with a very lump sum question. Why is it there in the first place?
Europa bezieht gegenwärtig im Jahr 500 Milliarden Kubikmeter Gas. Vor allen Dingen aus Norwegen und natürlich aus Russland.
At present, Europe is actually drawing 500 billion cubic meters of gas, predominantly from Norway and from Russia. That is the de facto situation right now.
Im Jahre 2015, so alle Schätzungen, brauchen wir weitere 200 Milliarden Kubikmeter, insgesamt also 700 Milliarden.
In the year 2015, if you believe current forecasts, we will be needing an additional 200 billion cubic meters, so a total of 700 billion cubic meters.
Die Nord Stream Pipeline durch die Baltic Sea kann 55 Milliarden Kubikmeter im Jahr transportieren, mehr nicht.
The North Stream pipeline that shall go through the Baltic Sea will be able, once it is in place, to transport 55 billion cubic meters. That is it.
Diese Zahlen machen deutlich, dass diese neue Pipeline gegen niemanden, nicht gegen die Pipeline durch die Ukraine, nicht gegen die Pipeline durch die baltischen Staaten und Polen gerichtet ist, sondern zusätzlichen großen Bedarf bedienen muss.
And these figures very, very clearly show that this Nord Stream Baltic Sea pipeline is not trying to contend other existing pipelines, such as the one in the Ukraine, such as the one in the Baltics or in Poland or whatever. It will be coming in as a complementing, not as a competing factor.
Die Opposition gegen die Pipeline ist teils aus ökologischen Sorgen gespeist, teils einfach politischer Natur.
The opposition against this pipeline, it basically stands on two pillars. One is an environmental concern and the other one is sheer political counter-pressure.
Soweit sie sich bezieht auf Fragestellungen des Umweltschutzes, wird das sorgfältig aufgearbeitet werden, und zwar im Dialog mit denjenigen, die diese Sorgen öffentlich deutlich machen.
When it comes to questions of environmental concern, obviously all of the justified questions will have to be clearly discussed, seen to and sorted in a clear and open dialogue with the people raising those questions.
Soweit es historisch bedingte politische Widerstände, etwa in den baltischen Staaten oder in Polen sind, muss man damit umgehen, muss man deutlich machen, dass man Verständnis für Geschichte hat und für Fortwirken von Geschichte in der Gegenwart, dass aber die Energieversorgung ganz Westeuropas darunter eben nicht leiden darf.
When it comes to feelings of historical political resistance against the project as such, be it by the Baltics, be it by Poland, I think, then that is a subject one has to go into and deal with. I think it is very obvious to show that there is and there needs to be a great understanding of the historic givens that are burdening these types of discussions. But at the same time, we cannot afford to just leave things at that and therefore accept that there is dependence of the whole of Western Europe on these importations of gas. And we can't say we won't have them just because of those historic reasons. Obviously, discussion needs to take place.
Thank you, Mr. Chancellor.
Yes.
Next question.
Thank you, Chancellor Schröder, for your appearance here. My question is related to somewhat to Professor Dicey's first question. What, at this point in time, that is presently, are the 2 or 3 most pressing issues between Russia and the West that need to be resolved, to prevent any further deterioration of the relationship, and so that we can go forward and, engage between Russia and the West?
Bundeskanzler, was sind die 3 brennendsten Fragen gegenwärtig, die eigentlich zwischen Russland und dem Westen und deren Zusammenarbeit stehen?
Ich glaube, die zurzeit wichtigste ist die Frage des Raketenabwehrsystems in Tschechien und Polen, weil man in Russland zu der Auffassung gekommen ist, dass das weniger zu tun hat mit einer ja nach allen Äußerungen nicht wirklich existenten Bedrohungen aus dem Iran, sondern zu tun hat mit einer Politik der Einkreisung, politisch wie ökonomisch, Russlands. Das scheint mir das eine sehr wichtige Problem zu sein. Das zweite ist sicherlich ein Gefühl in Russland, dass man nicht will, dass das Land, nachdem es ökonomisch erstarkt ist, gleichsam als Player auf der internationalen Ebene auf gleicher Augenhöhe mit den Vereinigten Staaten von Amerika verhandelt. Und das dritte ernsthafte Problem ist, dass man in Russland das Gefühl hat, dass trotz allem, was man was man an Einsicht gezeigt hat, trotz allem, was man an Kompromissen etwa in der Terrorismusbekämpfung bereit war zu tun, dass man nicht die Resonanz im Westen, speziell auch in den Vereinigten Staaten von Amerika, gefunden hat, nicht das partnerschaftliche Umgehen, das man erwartet hat. Letztlich hat man das Gefühl, dass man als Partner nicht in der Weise ernst genommen wird, wie es den eigenen Wünschen, auch den eigenen ökonomischen und politischen Möglichkeiten entspricht. Ich glaube, dass das der Kern dessen ist, was man verändern muss.
I think, sir, that the most important question of the three, because you were talking about the three hottest issues, basically, I think the most important one certainly is the missile defense program, the missile defense system cutting through the Czech Republic and Poland predominantly, because the Russian side very much feels that the reasoning given for it, the priority reasoning given for it, namely that there were to be a threat coming from Iran which needs to be fended off, the Russians feel that that is not really a point that they see, certainly after more recent information about the threat from Iran being not as hot as portrayed beforehand. Certainly that is the feeling that the Russian side has. They far rather feel that it is a policy of encirclement of Russia as such, politically and economically. They feel that they're going to be embraced by this movement, which they are not feeling particularly happy or comfortable about. I think that is certainly the most important issue that would leap to my mind as number one now that you are asking me. Secondly, I would say there is a feeling amongst the Russians that now, after they have gone in and have made all of that economic recovery, after all that time, where they have made an effort to show movement and to really change, they still feel that when negotiations take place, particularly between them and the United States of America, they are not being talked to at eyesight level. They still feel that when they're being talked to, it is not on an equal footing, and therefore do not feel very fairly dealt with as a consequence. And thirdly, I think the Russians most generally, and here I'm not just talking about the government, feel that despite everything they've done, despite the insight that they have shown into lots of issues, despite the compromise that they have very obviously made in lots of areas, despite everything that they have done to contribute towards the fight against international terrorism, they still feel that they are not a full and proper and equitable partner. That they feel that they're just not seen on the right type of level, economically and politically speaking, when it comes to negotiations. And I think that is where I see that the core of the problem between particularly these two blocs. And I think things will have to change there, otherwise they will not take a good turn.
Yes, Sarah, in light of your very well-known background, many people, especially many Americans, were rather surprised to find that you went to work for Gazprom. And at this point in time, you have just finished mentioning the fact that the Russians do not see themselves as an equal partner in relationships. Well, perhaps part of the reason for that might be the fact that the Russians had been very much involved in Iran for many years, had helped build certain structures there, have sent Russian scientists there, and so on. And so that I would like, if you would, to respond to that, as well as respond to the fact that many people now see Putin moving more and more to the right. Thank you very much.
Herr Bundeskanzler, bei Ihrem Hintergrund ist es etwas erstaunlich, dass Sie dann gegangen sind, haben angefangen für Gazprom zu arbeiten. Vielleicht sind die negativen Gefühle gegen Russland auch der Tatsache geschuldet, dass die Russen eigentlich sehr stark im Iran involviert waren, dort Strukturen aufgebaut haben, dort Wissenschaftler hin entsendet haben, insofern im Aufbau der Strukturen, die uns jetzt aus dem Iran bedrohen, durchaus beteiligt waren. Und viele sehen da ihre Position als etwas schwierig an.
Also meine Position sehe ich als nicht schwierig an. Im Übrigen arbeite ich nicht für Gazprom, sondern ich arbeite für eine Company, die ein Joint Venture zwischen Gazprom auf der einen Seite und zwei deutschen und einer holländischen Firma auf der anderen Seite ist. Also eine Company, die ausschließlich die Aufgabe hat, diese Gasleitung durch die Ostsee zu bauen. Eine Gasleitung, von der ich gesagt habe, dass sie für die europäische, keineswegs nur deutsche Gasversorgung außerordentlich wichtig ist. Nur ganz nebenbei, läge diese Pipeline in einer anderen Region und wäre das ein Joint Venture zwischen einem amerikanischen und zwei deutschen Unternehmen, hätte niemand was dagegen, wenn ein ehemaliger deutscher Bundeskanzler den Aufsichtsrat dieser Gesellschaft führte. Man sollte mal darüber nachdenken, warum das in diesem Fall anders ist.
Firstly, Madam, let me correct you very slightly. I am not working for Gazprom. That is a misconception. I am working for let me elaborate, I'm working for a company that has a joint venture, and one of the partners within that joint venture is Gazprom. There are also two German companies and one Dutch company in that joint venture. So it is a club of four, of which Gazprom is just one. And their sole purpose is to go and build the aforementioned Baltic Sea gas pipeline, which, as I just outlined, is so tremendously important for Europe. But by the way, it is actually very interesting. You should be raising your question, and you should be raising it in the way you are doing. I always find it interesting to just imagine if that pipeline were not in exactly the spot it is in right now, but if that pipeline were in a different region, and let's just assume that pipeline were to be built in a joint venture between a US-American company and two German companies, you don't think anybody would shrug a shoulder about a German ex-chancellor taking a seat on their supervisory board. Now, isn't that an interesting thought? Why is that so different?
Was ich damit sagen will, ist, dass man nicht doppelte Standards anlegen sollte. Ich erfülle dort eine Aufgabe, und zwar liegt die im Interesse der europäischen Gasversorgung. Solange ich diese Aufgabe erfüllen kann, ohne irgendwelche Pressionen, und es gibt keinerlei Pressionen, finde ich daran nichts, was kritisierenswert wäre.
So what I'm trying to say here is let's be really fair and not have any double standards when it comes to these things. And let me be very frank here. I am doing my job within that joint venture, and I'm doing my job very much in the interest of European gas supplies. And I think as long as I'm completely free in my decision-making and in the job that I'm doing there, I do not see why anybody should come and criticize me for it.
Übrigens, dieser Aufsichtsrat hat 8 Mitglieder, 4 vom Mehrheitsgesellschafter Gazprom und 4 von den anderen Firmen. Ich bin einer der 4, die nominiert worden sind von Gazprom und habe das Casting Vote. Das heißt, ich könnte in jeder Entscheidung, die nicht sachgerecht wäre, den Mehrheitsgesellschafter überstimmen. Ich betrachte das als einen Beweis von Vertrauen.
And actually, just one more thing. The supervisory board of that joint venture consists of 8 members. 4 members come from Gazprom and 1 come from the German companies involved. I am actually one of the 4.
4 and 4.
Yeah, I am one out of the 4 nominated by Gazprom, and I have a casting vote. So if there is a decision taken that I consider to be going the wrong way, I can use that casting vote, and I can actually go in and outvote the majority shareholder within that consortium. I consider that evidence of trust.
Jetzt zu der Frage Verhältnis Russland-Iran. Ich kenne die Einzelheiten nicht. Ich weiß nicht, wer zu welcher Zeit technische Hilfe geleistet hat. Der Iran hat ja eine ganz eigene Geschichte nach dem Zweiten Weltkrieg. Es waren ja auch andere sehr dichte Beziehungen vorhanden zwischen dem Iran und anderen Ländern, auch sehr dichte Beziehungen zu bestimmten Zeiten zwischen den Vereinigten Staaten und dem Iran, immer mal wieder, natürlich auch zwischen Russland und dem Iran. Wer aber sich die Situation anschaut, der wird sehen, dass bis zum jetzigen Zeitpunkt das, was in den Vereinten Nationen entschieden werden musste, mit der Stimme des ständigen Mitglieds Russland entschieden ist. Und es gibt keinen Anlass daran zu zweifeln, dass das in Zukunft anders sein wird. Dass die Situation sich, was den Iran angeht, ein bisschen verändert hat, das kann man nun nicht Russland anlasten, sondern das hat doch eher zu tun mit Stellungnahmen der Sicherheitsdienste in den Vereinigten Staaten von Amerika.
And now on the other question, Madam, you were raising about Russia and Russian involvement within Iran. Now, you shall accept my apologies for the fact that I am not aware of the nitty-gritty details of who went in and did what at what specific point in time. Certainly, we're all agreed that Iran has had a very varied and interesting history, certainly also and especially since the end of the Second World War. There have been very close ties, not just with Russia, but with lots of other countries as well. Iran has entertained close allegiance with lots of other countries. There have also been close ties between the United States of America and Iran at specific points along the history there. But let's leave all that aside. I think if you see the situation as it presents itself right now, then any decision taken or any resolution adopted by the Security Council, for example, against Iran has always been decided with the voice of the member Russia too. And I very much think that that is going to continue. I think the situation of Iran changed at a specific point in time. The perception of it changed, particularly at a specific point in time. But I do not really see that that was so very much Russia's fault. From what I remember, the change of, as we saw Iran at that point in time, was very much the consequence of evidence presented by United States security institutions.
Mr. Chancellor, I think you may have missed an opportunity to respond to part of a question that you were asked earlier, which had to do with the environmental consequences of the Baltic pipeline. Perhaps you'd like to say something about that.
Sie haben eben nicht so sehr auf die Umweltkonsequenzen bei der Ostsee-Pipeline abgehoben. Können Sie dazu vielleicht noch mal
Es gibt zwei Bereiche, die von Bedeutung sind. Einmal geht es um die Frage der Munition, die seit dem Zweiten Weltkrieg in der Ostsee lagert und die natürlich gewisse Gefahren in sich birgt. Die Lösung kann nur in Folgendem passieren. Alle diejenigen, die mit der Pipeline beschäftigt sind, haben sich verpflichtet, soweit sie Munition feststellen können, die zu katalogisieren und sie zu beseitigen. Das heißt, die Pipeline im Verfolg ihres Baues würde die Situation, was diese Frage angeht, eher verbessern als verschlechtern.
There are two areas that are predominantly of importance when it comes to environmental concern about the Baltic Sea pipeline. The first one is the question of old ammunition that is still to be found all over the place, particularly in the Baltic Sea. The solution here must be and will be that all involved parties within the pipeline project have already committed themselves to very carefully map, catalogue and then go in and destroy that weaponry and that ammunition that they still find in there, so that by the end of the day one has to say that when it comes to tidying up this waste, the pipeline will actually be a plus, environmentally speaking, rather than a minus.
Und das Zweite sind Umweltgesichtspunkte, die die Verlegung einer solchen Pipeline als solche betreffen. Jeder Eingriff in die Natur bringt natürlich ökologische Probleme mit sich. Das ist übrigens an Land nicht anders. Und was wir in der Gesellschaft, wozu wir uns verpflichtet haben, ist wirklich nach dem Stand der Technik, der möglich ist, mit diesen Gefährdungen umzugehen. Es gibt große Erfahrungen gerade in Europa bei der Verlegung von Unterwasserpipelines, sodass wir diese Gefahren für beherrschbar halten. Wir nehmen aber durchaus die Diskussion, die ja keineswegs eine spezifisch europäische ist, über den sorgsamen Umgang mit der Umwelt bei solchen industriellen Projekten sehr ernst. Es handelt sich um ein Investment von etwa 8 Milliarden Euro und ein nicht geringer Teil an Kosten wird entstehen durch einen besonderen sorgsamen Umgang mit den Umweltbedenken, die bislang erhoben werden und denen wir zu begegnen haben.
And the second sphere of environmental concerns are concerns regarding the placement, the factual placement of the pipeline within the seabed. It is generally true that when you put infrastructure, energy infrastructure like this one into anywhere, there is no difference actually between whether it goes along the seabed or whether it is a pipeline on land. Whenever you place such a piece of energy infrastructure, you obviously intrude with the habitat, with the environment around you. But as I said, there is no difference to that whether it is on land or underwater. Now, certainly the joint venture has committed to using state-of-the-art technology at any given point possible. Europe actually has a lot of experience with placing seabed pipelines. Certainly all of the experience available will be tapped and made use of in the process, and we can only try to be as careful as we can by dealing with all of the environmental issues cropping up in the process. If you look at the order of magnitude of the investment, we're talking 8 billion euros worth of investment here, then I am pleased to say that not a small share of that money actually goes on special environmental care alongside the building of the pipeline.
Ein Beispiel zu sagen, wir müssen zum Beispiel besonders sensible Teile des Meeres umgehen, indem wir die Pipeline anders, auch aufwendiger verlegen, als das der Fall wäre, wenn es diese besonders sensiblen Gebiete in der Ostsee nicht gäbe.
Just to give you an example, the pipeline actually has to go through some deviations when there are particularly sensitive patches of the seabed as they exist in the Baltic Sea. That's obviously an effort made to support the environment.
I think we have time for one more question. Yes, sir.
Chancellor Schröder, my name is Stefan Minovic. I'm a CPAC grad, I'm a businessman, I'm also a newspaper editor. And it's a privilege for me to address you tonight. Your father was a brave man. He died like a great soldier in Romania. My father was part of the unit that actually was nearby when this took place, and your father fought against Soviet Union and Russia. And obviously he didn't trust the Russians or the Soviets. The sentiment prevails today in this part of the world. Romanians, people in the Baltic states, they're not too keen on having Russians control or try to control them, whether it's the military control or economic control. You were still in the office when the Russians almost cut off the Ukrainians with their gas supply, leaving them in the cold. Taking this into account, the question is, can we really try the Russians? Because the Romanians have a saying, a wolf will shed its hair, but never its nature.
Sie nimmt auf Ihren Vater Bezug, Rumänien im Kampf. Damals Ihr Vater hat die Russen negativ gesehen, die Rumänen tun das heute noch und die haben ihre Gründe dafür. Sie können vielleicht verstehen, dass Rumänen deshalb keine russische Kontrolle wollen. Sie waren auch noch im Amt, als die Russen den Ukrainern den Strom abgedreht haben. Wieso sollen wir denen trauen?
It's a little bit difficult to understand, not because of your English, because of the
Acoustics.
the what?
Acoustics.
Yeah, the acoustic here. Zunächst einmal, ich weiß nicht, ob mein Vater die Russen gehasst hat. Ich glaube das nicht einmal. Er war ein einfacher Arbeiter und er ist in einem Krieg gefallen, den Hitler-Deutschland begonnen hatte und nicht Russland. Das ist einer der Gründe, warum ich meine, dass es zwar keine Schuld gibt, die man auf die nächste Generation weitergeben kann, aber Verantwortung dafür, dass so etwas nie wieder passiert, schon. Und erinnern soll man sich schon, von wem der Krieg ausgegangen ist.
Well, firstly, sir, let me begin by saying I obviously don't know whether my father hated the Russians or was most worried about the Russians at the time when he was fighting. My father was a very humble, plain man, and he was fighting in a war that had been started by Hitler and certainly not by the Russians. So I don't know what his feelings were at the time, but certainly we need to be fair and say who started this dreadful war, and it was Hitler and the Germans and not Russia. That is actually also why I feel, I'm not one of those who feel that guilt can be and should be passed on from one generation to the next, but certainly responsibility and the recognition of the facts of the truth. So, such as the fact as to who started what war at what point in time and for what reason.
Der Konflikt im Jahre 2006 zwischen der Ukraine und Russland war ein Konflikt um Preis für Gas. Sie wissen vielleicht, dass zu der damaligen Zeit der souveräne Staat Ukraine für 1000 Kubikmeter Gas $50 bezahlte, während alle anderen Staaten, zum Beispiel in Westeuropa, Marktpreise zu bezahlen hatten, und die waren bei $240. Welchen Grund soll ein börsennotiertes Unternehmen wie Gazprom haben, einen souveränen Staat zu subventionieren? Es war ein klassischer Preiskonflikt, wie es ihn immer mal wieder gibt. Das ist bedauerlich, aber man muss, glaube ich, auch insofern bei den Tatsachen bleiben.
If you looked at the conflict in 06 that you're referring to between the Ukraine and Russia, then I think we have to be very fair and openly say that it was a conflict on the price of energy delivered. And if you look at what the price was at the time, then the price, and the independent country of Ukraine paid $50 for 1,000 cubic meters of gas. Now, all the other countries across the whole of Europe and beyond paid market price, which at the time was $240 for 1,000 cubic meters of gas. Now, if you wanted to, you could say, why should an independent company, a profit-orientated company, obviously like Gazprom, subsidize a sovereign state by this order of magnitude? Certainly the point I'm trying to make is that this was a conflict of price.
Die Frage, ob man Russland, was seine Lieferungen mit Gas angeht, trauen kann, wird ja viel gestellt. Und es gibt sehr unterschiedliche Antworten darauf. Wenn man Erfahrungen zugrunde legt, muss man sagen, dass zum Beispiel Deutschland nie Schwierigkeiten gehabt hat, was Gaslieferungen aus Russland angeht. Nicht während des Kalten Krieges, nicht jetzt und angesichts sehr langfristiger, immer erfüllter Verträge auch in Zukunft nicht.
And basically the main question you're asking is, can one trust the Russians about energy supplies, or in this instance, can one trust them that they will continue with the delivery of their gas supplies? Now obviously there's a whole host of answers you can find for that question. Let me base my answer on experience that we as Germans have had in dealing with Russian energy supplies. That experience has certainly shown that Germany has never had a problem with supply integrity of energy imported into Germany from Russia. Not during all the difficult times of the Cold War, not right now, and I personally don't see them in the future.
Es gibt ein eigenes Interesse Russlands zu liefern. Etwa 25% des russischen Nationalbudgets werden von Gaslieferungen erwirtschaftet. Darauf kann gar kein Land verzichten. Das ist das eine. 70% des russischen Gasexportes gehen nach Westeuropa. Wenn Russland darauf verzichten wollte, würde das enorme ökonomische Verwerfungen zulasten Russlands mit sich bringen. Es gibt also eine gegenseitige Abhängigkeit. Und meine These ist, genau darum geht es, die gegenseitigen Abhängigkeiten zu verstärken, also die Unternehmen mehr miteinander zu verflechten, dafür zu sorgen, dass amerikanische, dass westeuropäische Unternehmen in Russland bei der Exploration, bei der Distribution von Gas, aber auch im russischen Markt tätig werden können und im Gegenzug natürlich russische Unternehmen in westeuropäischen und anderen Märkten tätig werden können. Übrigens, es gibt eine Reihe deutscher Unternehmen, die sowohl in der Exploration als auch in der Ausbeutung wichtiger Gasfelder bereits tätig sind. Das riesige Stockmann-Feld wird unter anderem von Total aus Frankreich mit ausgebeutet. Es gibt diese Verflechtungen und genau diese Verflechtungen schaffen eine gegenseitige Abhängigkeit und erlauben keine einseitigen Maßnahmen, wenn man sich nicht selber bestrafen will.
And I also think it's very much in Russia's own interest to keep the supplies going as well. If you look at the sheer facts behind it, for example, 25% of Russia's national budget actually is based on income gained through selling energy to Western Europe. Russia as a state could not forgo this type of income, certainly not in this order of magnitude. I repeat, it's 25% of their national budget. 70% of all Russian gas exports go into Europe in some way or the other. I think that is an absolutely enormous economic effect and an enormous amount. You can imagine the degree of problem that would crop up if those deliveries were not rendered. I think it is far rather a situation not of dependency, but of interdependency, mutual dependency. And that is something I actually like talking about because that is very much my point. I think we need more contacts and more interdependence than we have so far. I would very much hope that we see more cooperation of German and Russian companies, or also of others to that effect, working together in the field of exploration, of distribution, of the sale of energy, be it gas, be it oil, be it other resources. And I would very much hope to see that more Germans go and work in Russia in companies of that nature, and that exactly vice versa. More Russians come into Europe or into Germany and do the same here for us. I think it already happens as well. There are already quite a few German companies very actively working in the energy sector in Russia. And if you look at the huge Stockmann field, for example, that is already co-exploited by Total in France. Yet again, another international project of cooperation between Russia and, in this instance, France. So I think more dependency, more interdependency rather than less. That is very much my point.
Thank you very much.
On behalf of Columbia University, its School of International and Public Affairs, and SIPA's Center for Energy, Marine Transportation and Public Policy, I want to thank you for a penetrating and interesting lecture and for your thorough and straightforward answers to all of the questions that you have received this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.